Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about how do you create a consistent look and feel as a SharePoint administrator. How do you set your environment set up so that your business users or your users, as they're requesting the site, one, you kind of keep them scoped into different site types. Site types are going to be germane to your business and using your nomenclature there at your organization, at your business, and not necessarily communication site, team site, but more so I need a project site, I need a department site, I need a community site, I need a site to, maybe ad hoc or whatever the case may be. So you understand that the site types are going to be centered. So this is going to be around, in the previous video, we talked about our different strategies for requesting sites. So the self-service or request service. This particular strategy and site template strategy is going to be for request service. Now, if you look at the whiteboard, this is what we're going to do. So basically for the request service, because we're going to disable all the self-service capabilities within the tenant, and we're going to replace that with a form, Power App form, that allow them to specify the information they need to request a site. And once that gets submitted, it's going to drop that request in a SharePoint list, and from that SharePoint list, we're going to send a notification to the administration team, the SharePoint admin team, and they will take that request and based on that site type, create that site. Now, we definitely want this to be, from the various site types, we definitely want that to be based off a template. We do not want our SharePoint admins creating these sites manually, meaning that they create the site and they drop in the wet parts and they adjust the theme and all this other good stuff. We don't want that, the SharePoint admins, to do that piece of it. This is what I would consider a semi-automated process, because the fact that a SharePoint admin has to touch this request is, raise a few flags, but for a first iteration or first round, this is perfectly fine, because you need something in place to get out the gate, and you don't want to hold up this process because your engineers are working on trying to automate this part of it, right? So what does the form, let's kind of walk through the form. So let's take a look and see what this looks like. And then I'll take you behind the scenes on what this looks like, and then we can talk through some of the other pieces. So this is going to be the Power App form, and I have this bookmarked here. And with this Power App form, let's just say I need a HR department site, right? Here, my business unit would be human resources. Ideally, this would be, and I'm actually surprised this is not a drop down. So ideally, this would be a drop down versus freeform text, allowing them to select it. Because in your organization, you have a finite list of business units, so why not make that a drop down? And then the site type, this is the piece I was referring to. Notice that I don't notate Microsoft Teams. I don't notate modern SharePoint versus classic SharePoint, modern SharePoint communication, or modern SharePoint Teams, or whatever the case may be. I don't reference Yammer, even though I reference community. In this context, this is community as is sought by business users. This is something we're doing out in the community, or Habitat for Humanity, or maybe there's a cleanup, or maybe there's a, reading books to school age kids, or whatever the case may be, or feeding the hungry. So these are going to be community sites, and they would spin up these sites, and then anyone interested in this particular activity will follow this site and come to the site for the latest and greatest about that topic. The same is true for all my projects and microsites, so on and so forth. So they select the site, and what I'm doing here in this description, and maybe what we would do is create a video enhancing this process, because I give them a description on the different types, like, okay, for a collaboration type, you're going to get X, Y, Z. The piece that I think is missing that would be extremely helpful is giving them a image or a graphic, or maybe a link to what a collaboration site looks like, right? And the same for a department-wide site. Okay, here's the description that help differentiate the department or wide versus a private, and make sure they're selecting the right based on their intent and their activity. But also, I want to give them a sample of what that site would look like. So that's something we can add as a feature enhancement. So once we do that, estimate number of users can be org-wide, whatever. Use this at your discretion. What's the right even if you need it, like you may or may not need it, but it's good to know, right? As a SharePoint admin, to get a sense of if it's heavily utilized or underutilized. For them, and I'll say it's probably not that useful because their intent and then the reality could be two drastically different things, right? So we can get a sense of which one of our sites in our 10 are popular, but it's going through the SharePoint admin and looking at the view count or the usage count for that particular site collection. So it's a good data point, but data classification, this is another one. You want to grab this information up front, keep it very simple initially, right? General, internal use only, confidential, type secret. There may be a blur, like, okay, what's the difference between these two? You can define that, right? Or you can work with your governance team to help define, what this should be. But anyway, just kind of get a sense of the type of data they plan to store here, grow this, as your needs, as your organization needs warrant, and kind of go from there. The next two, I would say, out of all of these, site type and primary and secondary owner are probably the most critical. The primary owner is who's requesting site. You can assume it's the current user, and you can default the dropdown to be the current user. But there are scenarios where you may have someone requesting this on the behalf of another team member, and that's why this is an option. And then secondary, again, just back up. The primary maybe is on vacation for 2 weeks. Who's going to manage access to their site, so on and so forth, and then the brief description. Okay, so once they hit submit, this is going to go ahead and write to the SharePoint list. And this is the SharePoint list I was referring to. Notice how that Power App was a standalone, or AKA Canvas app. It's really meant to live on its own. There's no reason to point them to this list. This list is really meant for the administrators who are going to get this request. And one, it gives them a laundry list of everything that's been requested, and then they can filter on the ones that are pending to be acted on, right, by filtering on requested. And then if management needs to come in here and say, okay, how well are we, progressing, they probably do a count that says, hey, we need to do something with all these open requests, right? And then you can compare that to created date to see the age of them and so on and so forth. So you can get very, very creative with this SharePoint list. But here as an admin, I can come in, I can pick up this request, and notice there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. But I can pick up this request, I can change the status because I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna work on this, and that way other admins won't grab it because they see that I'm working on it. And then I can leave comments, checking on the right. So I can use this out of the box commenting system to kind of get status updates on where I'm on, or if this is on hold, or if I'm blocked, why it's blocked, so on and so forth. So you can use this form on the same request item. This is the same item that was captured by the Canvas app, dropped into this list, and here I'm just managing the status of this particular request. And then once this thing gets built, I can then go ahead and create the site, and then that's going to give me a URL, and then this is where I drop the URL, and I will go ahead and mark it as done. Now, ideally, so you notice how I'm kind of flipping between the different statuses. Usually the key status here is going to be completed. What you want to do here is have Power Automate listening to this list when the item is modified. Watch out for that particular status, and then once it notices that it's completed, maybe it fires off an email to the requester, CC the secondary owner, so on and so forth, and shoot them a notification that the site is created, embed the URL to the new site, and then they can click on it and kind of go their merry way. So that's a high-level overview of how you would create a site creation process, right, for a request service strategy. Now, let's look at the other component, this piece right here. So let's look at so this is SharePoint admin. They got the request, and now they need to create the site. All right, so once we go into the create site step, this is where the admin will look at, based on the site type requested by the user, they would kind of go into their laundry list of the different templates. So here I went ahead and created a template for all my project sites, and you will notice that it has some of the key web parts, some of the key components, a document library, key contacts, maybe a highlighted date or a countdown to a milestone date, so on and so forth. I also have one for department site. So ideally, for every site type that you have in that drop-down list in your Power App, this is where you want to go ahead and create a template referring to that. Now, let's talk about this strategy before I show you the PowerShell script, which is actually surprisingly extremely super simple, right, to apply. And we're going to walk through, creating a site and then applying the template, so on and so forth. So one of the key things that with this strategy with the department site, let me go back to the whiteboard, is, right, so one of the key things that we do here is that we have a site, and this is a standard site collection that's decorated. The only difference between this site and any other site within their tenant is that we give it the key name template in the site type, in the site title, right? So here we got department template, and then for the project it's a project template. So this is the only thing technically they're 1000% the same, but the key differentiator is the fact that this is a template. No one have access to modify this template. We may give everyone access to view it, and if we incorporate this into our site request form to where they can view and get a sample of what that site looks like, but no one's modifying this outside of the SharePoint admin team. And the beauty of this approach is that you actually have a physical site collection that represents your template. Is that when we run the script, there's two pieces to that script. The first part of the script is going to ingest this site design, create an XML file, and then store it somewhere on your local directory. Now, what you do with this XML file is up to your process. Ideally, you probably want to store this in a central location to where it's not all on your C drive or D drive in your local device. So you want to store this probably like in the document library that only admins have access to. So really, that's step one. So step one is to take the site design of your template. So it's going to take the site design of your template and extract that to an XML file. Now, with the PnP provisioning process, you actually have, I think it's we're up to three file types, and those different file types have stored different types of information. For this example, we're going to use XML, but go and Google search the PnP provisioning process just so that you're familiar with it and understand the different site types, because there's pros and cons or benefits with using different site types. In the .pnp site, file type, not site type, file type. The PnP file type stores way more information than the .xml file type. So just be aware of that, especially when you get into other scenarios that you may be using this, especially in the automated way. Now, that would be step one. Step two would be you take that XML, and as a SharePoint admin, what you're going to do, you're going to create a site collection, right? You're going to create the site collection based off the core modern templates, right? Either a team site or a communication site. And then in this step, you will apply the site design from your site template to your new site. Okay. Now, why is this strategy beautiful and has a fantastic maintenance story? Part of the reason is anytime there's a change. So, and these sites can be very elaborate, right? So you can have multiple lists, multiple libraries. You can have multiple views in that library, so on and so forth. Different columns, tie it to your term store. I mean, you can do like all the key configuration you need and make that part of your site template and have it applied to your new site. Extremely powerful. Now, we know over time the requirements for this site, especially like let's call this the department site template. The requirements for your department site template may change over time. There may be a new library. There may be a new view that you want to apply, and so on and so forth. So instead of fighting with XML or JSON or all those other configurable files that create site designs and site scripts and so on and so forth, you actually have what you see is what you get site. Go in there, click, apply what you need, rerun step one, regenerate this site template XML, and now all your net new sites that are going to be based off the template will get the latest and greatest. And that's a key point to make. Your net new sites will get the latest and greatest. This has zero impact on all your existing sites. So if you have 20 department sites and then today you decide to make a change, the change will not apply to the 20 department sites. And that will kind of force you to either manually updating those if needed, or create some type of PowerShell script that does some mass updates. So just one thing to keep in mind. So though this has a maintenance story moving forward for net new, retrofitting the existing is not part of this model yet. That would just be a separate step that will be a little bit more technical. Okay, let's look at this PMP provisioning template. Now, I've done a video on setting up this PMP provisioning, and I got a lot of feedback on I'm trying this step and I'm getting the error. Why is that? And that's part of two reasons. The PMP provisioning script, PMP in general, PMP PowerShell in general, is now in the middle, as of October or November of 2022, is in the middle of transitioning from the standard .NET framework and its stack to .NET Core and its stack. So that's one change. The second change, they're, instead of depending heavily on CSOM and the SharePoint API, they're now morphing over to the Graph API and a little bit of SharePoint. So with the Graph API, you'll get way more capability. So if you are a SharePoint developer or a SharePoint admin that does SharePoint development activities here and there, you want to start to gravitate towards the Graph API for a lot of your SharePoint API calls versus the standard SharePoint API, which we're used to. So the PMP PowerShell and also the PMP Core with their .NET and SDK framework is doing that transition, and that's a heavy lift, right? And so it's it's two things you have to keep in mind when you're playing around with this PowerShell is to make sure that you're installing the right module. This module is the pnp.powershell module. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, so this is going to be so you notice that this is 1.11, the PMP PowerShell module. So everything I'm going to show you here, this should be the latest and greatest. I'm sure there's probably a new version, but I'm saying the latest and greatest as in this is using the .NET Core framework behind the scenes. So some of their commands may be different. So just one of those things to keep in mind. The second thing, during that transition, and I think this is probably due to, and I'm not 1,000% if this is correct, but I think this is probably due to Microsoft disabling the classic authentication model and favoring the modern authentication and security model. And because of that, when you try to run this PMP PowerShell script, you may start to get errors, and I'm gonna force that error so you can see it, but you may start to get errors that say, the PMP PowerShell needs global consent, or I forget the exact terminology, but you will see this from time to time again because they have a registration in the Azure App Store, right? They have an app registration in Azure, and with that app registration, that requires a certain consent at the global level. So as a SharePoint admin role, I don't think you're going to have enough rights to agree to that consent for your tenant. I think you're going to need a global admin to do that. Don't quote me on that, but I think that may be the case. But either way, you will get errors in this process if you don't have that global consent applied for the PMP PowerShell. And again, that's for their app registration in Azure. Okay, so once we get those prerequisites out the way, this becomes very, very straightforward. So now we go to the sample script. Let me go ahead and pop this into PowerShell ISE. And I really have this broken down into two main sections. You probably want to separate it into two different scripts. It's really up to you. I probably would recommend that. So the first set of script, we're starting with the last one first, which is backwards. So let's go to the first guy. So the first script, this is the one that creates this XML file. Now, warning on how you set this up, especially if you have multiple templates. You want your XML file to be named. You want to come up with a naming convention that represent that site template. So here I have, let's go ahead and paste this in. So I'm going to let's just start with the project one. So I'm going to grab this URL from my project template, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that here. Right, and this is all standard stuff. Let me see if I can zoom in so you can see it. This is all standard stuff, right? Connect to PMP, you give it the URL of the site that you want to connect to, and this switch here, interactive, and this is where if you don't have the consent, you will get an error. If you're trying to get around it, you can use the switch called web login. right? So web login, and this is the classic one. The new one, and you will get a warning if you use the classic one, is interactive. But you have to have the consent enabled. So this is a great litmus test. If you're working in an environment and you're not sure if they granted the PnP PowerShell consent, use this switch and it will let you know right away if it's been applied or not. And you want it to be applied because there's certain steps, though you may not get stopped initially, there's certain steps in this provisioning process that will stop you because the consent hasn't been granted yet. So again, just one of those things to keep in mind. Now, here we just get, this is a new action. I forget the terminology, like these are verbs, actions. I don't know. I don't know, but this is a new function within the PnP PowerShell. The old one was something like invoke. I don't know. It was an older name, and the older module. I'll put it in the description. Sorry, I don't remember the old module name, but this is a new module name because once they made that switch, it was such a breaking change switch or switch over that they gave it a new module name. And I think the old module name was something like SharePoint Online PnP Management Module or something like that. So PnP PowerShell will be the new one. But anyway, within PnP PowerShell, this is a new verb. So if you're looking at any of the old scripts or even my old video where I showed this step, you won't see this name, right? So that won't be available. And then basically all this is doing is based on the connected site with Connect PnP Online, it's going to save this XML file. So let's clean this up a bit. And then, so line 3, before I clean that up, line 3, you're just going to disconnect, which is just great housekeeping rules to have. Now, I'm going to clean this up because I want all of my templates to be stored in this path, right? And I want this to be named something more meaningful instead of the generic name PnP provisioning file. I want to call this the Tesla site template projects, right? And then once I run this, I get access denied. Interesting. All right, so I probably need to run this. I want to save this. So let's do this. Let's do Control C. And it could be that I'm running this on a VM. I'm actually using it's not going to let me save anything. Okay, so let's say no. I'm actually using Amazon's Workspace as my VM. And what I'm going to do is to run this PowerShell as an administrator. Right, so here, let me open up my file. And actually, I don't want to modify the sample. That's actually a good stop. So let me just paste everything here, save this as a new file. Oops, I want to save and click run. All right, so let me just kill this. So let me do save as. I want my PowerShell to live here. And again, I'm priming this to be separated into 2 files. So this first one is going to be my extract, right? And then while I'm here, so my extract doesn't need, it only needs these 3 lines, right? So let's go ahead and save that. And then for my new one, my apply, I want to do this. Let's go ahead and free this up. There's a couple more tweaks I want to make, but for as of right now, let's just set up our framework, our foundation to at least separate these. So this is going to be site template apply, and then save that. Okay, so if I come back to my extract, this is saving in the right spot, and basically all I want to do is run this. All right, so I set up I select the right account, and again, that interactive is what allows that account to allows that little web dialog to pop up. And this is important because, you know, now organizations are doing MFA, we got 2-form authentication or whatever the case may be. And to get through all of that setup, that interactive is important. And the other good news is once you kind of get through that, that initial setup, it saves that information. So you do get a token that's alive for a certain period of time, and you know, it just really helps with the streamlining the process as you kind of keep executing the script. So, okay, so that error message here is when I accidentally hit run and I closed the box and it just saying I canceled it, and then it threw errors that I wasn't authenticated. The second line here is when it actually executed and everything should be fine. So now if I go to my directory, I see this XML file. Do I got VS Code on here? Yeah. And within this XML file, you can see that everything that's in that master project template is extract it out and save, right? And we'll talk through in the next video how to be very, very intentional on what you bring out, because you would notice when I apply this site, when I apply this template to a new site, I'm gonna get dupes, I'm gonna get these other weird behaviors, but I have full control over what I extract and what I apply, right? So we'll walk through that in the next video. And, you know, spoiler alert, that's going to be in the config.json file. So for those who can't wait for the next video, you can run off and get familiar with that and all the configuration settings in that config.json file. Okay, so XML looks good. Now we want to do the second step, which is to apply it. So let's go out and create a site. Let's see, I think I need to switch over. This is Tesla. Yeah, let me bring this browser up. So I'm outside of the VM. I'm on SharePoint admin for the Tesla playground tenant. And now I want to create a site for projects. The dog's going crazy. Sorry about that. Projects has a left nav, so that's going to be a team template. Right, so I'm gonna just call this the site creation project, right? And I'm doing this as a SharePoint admin, right? Which is why I'm not using the Power App form. So I'm doing site creation project, and then if you have a naming convention that you want to apply, right? So maybe I'll do all of my project sites has that PRJ prefix. Oops, sorry, I did that on the wrong spot. Site. That gets me every now and then where I'm screwing up the email. And again, you can. This is an opportunity to where, because each team site gets a group email address for the project, which is very useful. So, you know, maybe you want to prefix this as project hyphen site creation. And then that way, if anyone's looking for an email, they know that all the project emails or project teams, their emails start with project, right? So here, site address, we want to do that. I want to put, I want to prefix this with PRJ. And I'm not too concerned with the casing because it's case insensitive. And then the group owner is going to be whoever the group owner is. I'm not going to go back and look. I'm going to just say Madison, just for the sake of demo. And then click next. And then for the other user, let's just call this was Ethan. I can go ahead and put Ethan in there and then make him an owner as well. And then hit finish. All right. So now that this is applied, I can look at this project site. And now this is my destination. Go ahead and copy this. Go back to my VM. Go back to PowerShell. And then the apply step, this is where I want to paste that in. Right, and again, connect to the new site that I created with my interactive flag, and then I want to make sure this is using the right template. So now what I want to do is to go ahead, because you know we renamed this, we repositioned it. So go ahead and grab the latest and greatest, the path to this XML. Oops, paste that in. All right. So what we want to do, let's take a look at it before we apply it, and then refresh it after the apply has completed. So let's go here, right? Very vanilla, right? It's everything we expect it to be as far as out of the box. So now we go to the PowerShell, go ahead and hit, let me save this, and then hit play. Go ahead and select my account. And this is running through the process. I think I have content types out there as well. No, we'll take a look. Still running. Okay, so now this is done. I have one error about the style library, which is not too concerning. It says something like no script is enabled, but we don't. This comes out of the box with the template, so I think we're fine here. So let's go ahead. For the moment we've been waiting on, just to take a look at this created site. So if I hit refresh, and just like that, the site is applied. And notice a couple of things happen. One, it automatically applied it to the hub, which is a really fantastic piece to that. And the other one, and this is what we'll cover in the next video, is the, let me get rid of this notification. this is the biggest sticky point. The biggest sticky point is this left navigation, right? So if you compare this to the template, you will notice that the template said home, project team, project plan, document, so on and so forth. And then if I look at this, I get everything that I was supposed to get from the template, but I also received all the out of the box and the default ones. And that config file that I gave you the spoiler alert on will help resolve that. But if you look at all the other components, you will see that everything came over as expected. Now, the one thing that I do not see is the announcements, right? So let's kind of go behind the scenes and see what happened there. So if I go to site contents, and we know that announcements are just news articles stored in the site pages page, I only have that default. So what it did, it modified the default home.aspx, and it applied all the web parts and styling and things like that to that page, but it did not bring over all of the other pages. So if I compare this site contents to the template, you will notice that my site pages have 3 additional pages, and site assets have additional items as well. And these are going to be more than likely the images associated with the other pages. So how do you solve for that piece? And that's where this config file that I keep hinting about really is going to solve for those components. And that's what we'll cover in the next video. Until then, I'll see you tomorrow.